students, good morning. Let's continue our discussion for information security, your final semester course, and take further unit number 1 with your class number 2. Now, let's just recap. We discussed about information security. We discussed Alice, Bob, and Eve. Alice is a client, your browser instance. Bob is your server, and Eve is your adversary. So when these these actors are a part of information domain, the information world, the first thing that comes to our mind is what is the need for security? It is very important for us to understand why we should be able to know more about security. So let's just plainly look at what information security is. So let's just look at the need for information security. Okay. So let me just put it in simple terms wherein we go to a text and see what is the need for information security. Why do you need information security? Information security protects sensitive information. Now, what do you call a sensitive information? Sensitive information is some information that is private to the users. For the sake of brevity, we have only 3 actors: Alice, a client; Bob, a single server; and Eve, an adversary. However, you have to remember that web or internet does not by default provide any security. It is the programmer's duty. So if I say it's your duty to ensure that the sensitive and private information is protected from unauthorized activities, means that there are multiple aliases, because there will be hundreds of clients on the web. There'll be thousands of clients. There'll be millions of clients on the web. So private and sensitive information of those clients has to be protected from an adversary called Eve. So remember, as a simplistic take, we have actually taken just 3 characters. There can be multiple adversaries like Eve on the internet, because by default, internet or web does not guarantee, or by default, there is no security and privacy protection management on the web. So if I am able to protect as a programmer or as a provider of some service, if I am able to protect my client from the adversary who tries to gain unauthorized access to some data, for example, your first name, your last name, your mobile number, your email ID, your national identification number, your biometric information, and many more, your gender, your preferences, all of this is called sensitive information. It's not sensitive data, mind you, because this information is powerful enough to create your virtual profile. So when we say this, when I am able to protect sensitive information from unauthorized activities like viewing sensitive information, I am able to protect my client's information from unauthorized viewing, unauthorized modification, unauthorized recording, or any other disruption or destruction, then I would say that as a service provider, as a server, Bob has been successful in ensuring the security and privacy of his client. It is very important. And what is the end goal? The goal is to ensure that the safety and privacy, so security, privacy and safety of critical data. Now see the word sensitive information has become critical. Whenever there is some private information about some user, it is always kind of critical information. So such customer information is very important in some sense that needs to be protected. We have to remember this. Never forget to remember this particular word. So let's just look at certain attributes. Information system means to consider available countermeasures. So a security service provider has to have measures or countermeasures in place wherein the system is able to ensure that its client data is protected. Very important. The purpose of data security management is to make some business continues, and if there are incidents, some security incidents happen, the business is able to recover from that very quickly. So in that sense, the basic principle of information security, the attributes that we have already discussed in our previous class, we have already discussed these 4 attributes. However, as it's a part of your unit, let's just briefly discuss them. If Bob is able to ensure that the communication between him and Alice, who is a client, is protected from unauthorized access, then we say, as a part of information security, Bob has been successful in maintaining the confidentiality of his communication. You have to remember that Bob is one server for the sake of simplicity, and there are n number of clients that Bob has. So there are multiple instances, thousands, million, hundreds of thousands records and hundreds of thousands of users. If you just take case of your email client, your Gmail, at a time, there'd be millions of people logging on to their mailboxes. So confidentiality is a principle. It's an attribute, which is the duty of the developer to maintain. So you have to keep confidential information, and it should be accessible only to the authorized user. So Alice's data should always be available with Alice, no one else. Then the second attribute is authentication. If Alice is a Bob's client, then Alice will always have a username and a password. Username is Alice's identity. Password is an authentication value, which only Alice knows. So now remember that authentication is very crucial when we consider information security, and we have to consider that with credentials of Alice, only Alice is able to log on. So Bob should be able to verify that it is the user Alice who has logged on. There should be no two ways about that. And Bob has to ensure that it performs a successful authentication. So in simplistic terms, it's a process of verifying that a person or a system is who or what it claims to be. Right? Rakesh should not be able to log on to Bob or based on Elisa's authentication values. So it is duty of Bob to ensure that there is a proper authentication. So you have to also remember, never share your password with anybody, because password is an attribute that allows you to log on. So password is your key to your server. Now, if you share your key with someone else, you have actually shared your secret. And when you share your secret, then I don't know how things are placed. So remember, never share your authentication values. Now, authentication is a critical component of confidentiality and availability. You have to remember, because when two parties are transacting, both needs to ensure that they are really transacting with someone with whom they are intended to discuss. So when Alice logs on to Bob to the server, a client logs on to server, it is the authentic client, the one who is supposed to log on, the one who has claimed is the real one. So you already know you have a two-step authentication apart from your passwords. If you activate a two-step authentication, as soon as you log on to your email client, it also verifies your machine via an app through a one-time password. So that one-time password is an authentication mechanism, which is an additional security measure deployed by the web server. Now, the third attribute that we need to also remember that we need to take care of is non-repudiation. But rather, let me tell you what is repudiation. Take for an example, you go to an ATM, you put your ATM card in the machine, you verify yourself with a PIN, a 4 or a 6-digit PIN. You will have the option to encash the money out of the machine, right? When you need. So if you take the money from the machine and then you say you didn't do it, then that's called repudiation. When you do something in an unauthorized manner, when you do something in an authorized manner or an unauthorized manner, and you are successfully able to claim that you didn't do that task, then you say you are repudiating, right? You are rubbishing that claim that you did it. You deny what you did. So information security has an attribute, a basic principle called non-repudiation. When Alice logs on to Bob, Alice should not be able to repudiate that she didn't log on. That's attribute. That principle is called non-repudiation. So no one should be able to repudiate when they actually perform a particular transaction. So in plain text, I would say non-repudiation implies that an action or a transaction cannot be denied by the individual or a system that performed it. So if that happened from your card with your PIN, it's you who did it. So the system should be able to guarantee that if you do something, there is a digital trace that will prove that you cannot deny once you do something. Now, confidentiality, authentication, non-repudiation, and the very important attribute called integrity. Integrity refers to accuracy and completeness of information. Let me give you a very simple example. You want to purchase Windows 11 from Microsoft. You pay for the licensed version, and now you want to download that information. See, now software don't come on diskettes. We already are aware that there is a huge bandwidth available with us. And I mean, we are always filled with mobile data. The internet comparatively is cheap. So whenever we purchase something, we download it. Assume that Windows is a 7 gigabytes of operating system software. So when you make a payment, it will allow you to download the authentic licensed version. When you download it on your machine, how would you be able to know that what was available on the Microsoft Store has actually been downloaded to your machine without any modification without a single bit data getting changed. Very important. So when something remains as is without allowing an adversary to modify the data, we call that property as integrity. And I think I discussed in your first class. We have a cryptographic hash, a fixed size, some byte string that can verify that the object available on the store that you downloaded is same and has not been modified. So it's a one-way function that actually verifies what you had has been achieved at your end, right? So integrity refers to the accuracy and completeness of information and prevention of unauthorized access. So what is the need of information security? It is important to protect sensitive and valuable information from unauthorized access. So someone logging in is an unauthorized access, someone downloading something, someone reading your emails is an unauthorized access. If that personal information is available to everyone on web, that information has been disclosed. If your email client is not available to you now, it's a disruption. If someone sends an email or a message under your name, it's a modification. Or if someone just deletes everything from your email client, it's a destruction. So we have to remember that there are important reasons for information security to be achieved. Ultimately, the center point is protecting sensitive user information. It is not even sensitive user data. Remember that. So let us just see how we have been actually able to ensure that these attributes are really able to achieve what exists on the web. So now if you see this, right, active or passive attack and denial of service, right? We also discussed something called basics of security, confidentiality, integrity, availability, and we discussed one more if you see here, which is important for us, confidentiality, integrity, authentication, non-repudiation. So availability is an attribute that we need to ensure. Why? Because a website should always be available. A website needs to remain available with us. Without that, your business doesn't work. So to ensure that the business happens, availability is to be ensured, right? So remember this attribute. Availability is an attribute that we need to have so that we are able to gain access to the active resource. Now, let's just look at another attribute in form of the assurance of security. Uh, Whenever non-repudiation is achieved, someone who has malicious desire or intent is not able to achieve that. And in order to achieve these three attributes, how do we go ahead? So we have something called services and mechanisms. See, we had a look at something called information security, need of information security. What are the kind of attacks that we have to consider, attributes to be achieved, and what are the services and mechanisms for that? So let me just briefly take you towards something called attacks, active and passive attacks. So let me just discuss that and then we can move further, right? The first response to something called attacks is who attacks and adversary attacks. For the sake of brevity, we kept a very simple scenario. The scenario that we usually look at, right, with reference to security is a very simple scenario. Just see. Alice, Bob, Eve. Why simplistic? Because a methodology wherein if you have multiple actors will always create problems. So we have a very simplistic scenario. But remember, there are n number of LICs logged on as client. There are n number of adversaries because on the web, on the internet, you do not know how many attackers. But for the sake of simplicity, we say there is just one server. Now we know, since the number of users are region based or probably based or via different continents and countries, when the number of clients increase, the mirror servers are also deployed based on locations. But for simplicity, we just say there is a client. So there are n number of clients who have logged on. So you have multiple LICs, one Bob, and you have multiple Eve, right? So who attacks? An attacker attacks, an adversary attacks. So how does Eve attack? There are two types of attacks that have been classified in information security. So information security classifies the attack types as two: active and passive. What's an active attack? An attack wherein the adversary employs different ways and means to gain unauthorized access to a resource, disrupt that resource, modify that resource, append something to that resource, pose as an unauthorized user. So when an adversary, that is Eve, actively participates to harm a genuine user allies, then we call that attack as an active attack. However, whenever an adversary wishes to attack, if you look at our normal scenario, even there, an attacker would want to attack. However, one has to ensure that one unauthorized adversary attacker, whom we know by the name Eve, has sufficient information about the client, that is Alice, and the server, that is Bob, to be able to take advantage of. How to do that? That is possible only when Eve is able to do a reconnaissance of the communication between Alice and Bob. If Alice is the target, then Eve should have sufficient information about Alice to be able to pose as Alice, should have particular information about Bob, wherein Eve should know how to be able to introduce herself as Alice, and Bob is not able to differentiate between Eve and Alice. So to do that reconstruction, to do that recon, to do the reconnaissance, an attacker always deploys an attack which is called passive attack. So to give you a very simple example, let me say, if Eve is an attacker, assume that you are Eve, you are an adversary. What would you want to do? As an attacker, you would want to actually monitor what is going on between Alice and Bob. What is going on between a client and a server? So what goes on is something very simple. You just sit aside, use some tool. For an example, you use Wireshark to monitor the network packets. So that's a passive attack. You are not actively engaged in attacking either Alice or Bob, either client or server, but you are gaining, you are doing a recon so that you have enough information to be able to later on deploy an active attack. Remember this very clearly. So let's look at passive attack first, then we look at active attack. Why look at passive attack first? Because passive attack is a facilitator of an active attack. Remember this very clearly. So just let's look it in a textual manner. Passive attack is also a type of security attack in which an attacker is in indirect contact with the target system, network, and monitors the communication between the target system. So you just need to monitor, you need to remain calm and see what's happening around. You look for chances where you get important information. In this attack, attacker monitors, intercepts, or eavesdrops on information transmission. So yeah, remember, when you are in a part of passive attack, you would not change the information. You are not in that realm to do any modification or affect the user, that is allies, based on your monitoring. So, but very important to remember, when you are only doing a recon information will be very useful while the adversary, that is Eve, deploys an active attack. What is the main objective? A passive attack gains unauthorized access to sensitive or confidential information without getting detected. So you lie low and keep monitoring. Passive attacks are difficult to discover because they don't directly, they do not directly impact the attack. They are not a part of the active attacks. So what are the kind of passive attacks? Releasing some message content. Attacker intercepts. So you use Wireshark, view the content, and use this information for your own good while you wish to attack the target. Do some traffic analysis. Attacker monitors traffic between two or more communication nodes to obtain information about what? Is there a pattern? Is there a change in the behavior? How do Alice and Bob behave? So that you can know via traffic analysis. You do a network mapping. Attacker creates a network map by monitoring the traffic and identify communication patterns between different devices. So you are trying to know more about the target whom you are going to attack. Additionally, you can deploy sniffers. There are programs which are called sniffers that can capture and analyze network traffic to be able to give you some information about login credentials, your addresses, your biometric information, or any confidential information that may be useful in the future. Now let's go to active attacks. Active attack is an attack where attacker directly makes an impact on the target. If attacker is targeting allies, attacks the clients. If attacker is targeting Bob, means it is attacking the server. So you are communicating with a target network. An attacker attempts to now see in passive, you were just an observer. However, here you are trying to modify or disrupt the system or network's functioning, either by logging as a legitimate user, though you are using those credentials, you are an unauthorized user. However, you have enough information about allies to be able to log on. You are executing some unauthorized commands. You are not authorized to do something, to run some commands which are very dangerous commands. They may bring down the system. They may bring down the server to a halt. So doing that, so you are actively trying to harm either Alice or Bob. Remember, Alice and Bob are two entities. we presume that Alice is a client. So multiple instances of clients across the globe. Bob is a server. So wherever services are being provided by a web server, that's Bob. So it might so happen that I may be able to log on, Eve may be able to log on as Alice and execute certain commands which are probably impactful on the server, which might just ensure that the server becomes unoperational, and hence a denial of service has just happened. So when someone performs a DOS attack, one or the other way, ultimately the Bob goes out of service. And that's what was desired by Eve. So whenever someone's able to compromise the integrity and reduce availability of the resources, system resources, which creates a significant damage or loss to the server, that is to Bob. Assume 1 million clients Bob had before the attack, and the client saw that, oh, this there are no good security mechanisms. So suddenly only 500,000, that is 5 lakh clients remain. So those number of clients reduced to half. Bob worked for 2 years to reach 1 million, and it took just one attack by Eve to reduce the clients to half. What are the kinds of or types of active attacks? This is a very prevalent attack as of now. Somehow, if I am able to ensure that Bob is knocked down, server is knocked down, then I say I have successfully been able to execute the DDoS attack. Next, if I am able to pose as Alice unauthorizedly without Alice's knowledge and been able to gain access to Bob's resources, I call it a masquerade. Somehow there was Alice and Ginny. If I am able to log into Ginny's session while I am using the services, then I say I have stolen a session ID, because for each client who are multiple in numbers, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands or millions, each client has a unique session ID, a number which is a private number established between itself and the server, the Bob. So if someone is able to hijack my session, that means again, it's a kind of an impersonation that has been achieved. Replay, a very simple attack. Alice asks Bob to meet her at 8 p.m. Eve modifies this message wherein 8 p.m. from p.m. P is replaced by an A. So 8 a.m. So when the message reaches Bob in due time, Bob assumes that he needs to meet Alice at 8 a.m. So there's a gap of 12 hours. So it's a replay and some modification. So this could create a lot of issues. To give you a real example, if the backup was supposed to be taken at 8 p.m. every day, and if the administrator sends a message wherein an attacker is able to successfully ensure that P is changed to A, then suddenly there's a 12-hour gap. So such active attacks are able to actually create a havoc. So I would say passive accompanies active. So passive attacks are very dangerous. However, passive attacks don't directly attack the target. Passive facilitates the target. Now, if we go to the syllabus and see last topic, services and mechanisms of information security. So let's just briefly dwell onto this, and then we can actually move towards something else. let's just say services and mechanisms, right? So what are the services and mechanisms of information security? So let's just look at this particular diagram. So now if you see this, this is on account the cookies are being stored by web servers on every client node on your computer without, I mean, it used to happen they were installed on your machine without your knowledge. However, the European Union GDPR law changed this. Now see, it asks you whether I would want to allow them to install cookies on my machine. If I say no, it cannot, right? So websites have to adhere to the rules and regulations, which are very, very important, right? So if you see this, right, what are security mechanisms? The first class, I gave you an example of encryption. So encryption is one of the way to achieve security. It's a mathematical model to do that. So we say cryptography and encipherment. Rather, cryptography and encipherment, both of them are same because you are trying to create a cipher out of some plain text. This word called plain text was discussed in our first class. Remember that. So encryption is a mechanism that can be deployed to achieve security. There is something called access control, allowing people with reference to their roles. An administrator will have many rights to make changes to the server. However, they cannot be given to a normal user. So assigning access to specific people based on their role is access control. Now, the third word is notarize, notarization. Notarize means someone who is an authority tells the system that this individual has been verified. So notarization in a way is a kind of a security certificate that even the servers need to take. So Bob needs to certify itself from a certification authority that it is genuine, it's not a malicious server. Remember this. Then achieving data integrity. Whenever data is downloaded by a client, one has to remember that data integrity has to be achieved. Authentication exchange, very important, right? Digital signature again identifies a participant clearly on the web. So one cannot do a denial, right? Once they perform some transactions. So as of now, I think we have been able to actually know a lot about the first part of our syllabus, the first unit of syllabus, Introduction to Information Security, where we have clearly described the basic concepts of security and attacks. So in very brief, we covered in these two classes, we covered information security. Why do we need security? We also took real examples in the presentation in the first class. Now we again looked at these terms with reference to your syllabus. We discussed in detail about the types of attacks. What is a CIA triangle? We discussed integrity, right? We discussed authentication, so very important. We looked at various ways and means to achieve security, so very important, right? So in brief, I would rather say the actors that we have, Alice and Bob, they are such that they are representatives of what is happening around. So see you next when we again meet for the next class, where we'll start with one of the